see what that's about. In the meantime, it is a couple minutes after 12, and we've got a bunch of people here. So welcome. This is a new player tutorial thing. It's not a session of D&D. I'm just going to be going through some of the basic rules and explaining them. So when you are in a session, you don't have to be constantly trying to figure out what you're doing and what's going on and all that. So hopefully you're in the right place. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. First thing is I wanted to go over some terms and stuff just to make sure we're all on the same pages. Um, so first off, this is all for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Uh, there's been 4 previous editions plus 3.5, but this is all for 5e, which is the current edition. Um, if you're playing a game that's using Pathfinder or something else, then some of the ideas here will apply, but none of the actual numbers or math will apply. Uh, D&D Beyond, Beyond 20, Astral, and Roll20 are all different programs you use in your browser to let you play D&D online as opposed to only in person. D&D Beyond is kind of a source hub for all D&D rules and characters and stuff. You've probably heard of it. Beyond 20 is a browser extension. I'll come back to that in a second. Astral and Roll20 are virtual tabletops, which basically let you see a tabletop that everyone all sees at the same time. So this is Roll20 right here. Uh, this is actually one shot I ran a while back. I'm just repurposing it. Um, Astral is a similar virtual tabletop. The only thing with Astral is that its development has been discontinued, which means Astral still works and it's still there. But they're not actively working on it, so there's a chance that it could fall away or have a bug introduced or that sort of thing. So it's still there, it's still around, but it's not actively in development. Beyond 20 is the browser extension that I mentioned, and what it does is it connects D&D Beyond to your virtual tabletop that you're using, which in my case is Roll20. Um, come to my extensions. You can see here, you just get some options from the extension in Google Chrome. And you also on Beyond 20 or D&D Beyond can get the tab here. Uh, you probably noticed this is a character sheet on D&D Beyond. We'll be getting to that more later. These are just all the dice that you use in D&D. Some of them you might not be familiar with if you've never played before, but they're just basically different sided dice going through D20, D12, D10, D8, D4. Hopefully you all know what a D6 looks like. And the D100 is just 2 10-sided dice, where one of them is the tens place and one of them is the ones place. In general, as a player, you'll be rolling D20s the most, and then some of the other dice, and D100s very rarely. All right, so first up, any questions so far?
Yeah, does this work in same as like the D20 and the Beyond Roll20? Do they work both in like England, wherever you are, like in
Yeah,
country-wise?
yeah. This is all in, they're just, what's the term? Normal shapes, equal sided, 20 sides, all equal chance, basically a 5% random number generator. And I guess I can show you this Roll20 stuff here. There are some options to roll dice using Roll20. So you can see there's this dice thing here, and I can roll 3d10 and it will pop up over here, kind of thing. You can also just type /roll d20 or whatever, and it will roll the die for you. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to characters. First question is, what is a character? Basically, a character is just someone in the world that you're playing D&D in. And what you guys are probably interested in is the player characters, the ones that you control. I wanted to mention here, I've seen a few people come into the Discord server and saying stuff like, "Oh, I have a level 3 character, so I'm looking for a level 3 game," kind of thing. Um, and that's not exactly how D&D works. It's not like an MMO where you make a character and then you level them up and you take it from game to game and you stick with that character. Each game of D&D is pretty much separate from all the others, and your character will be for that game. There's nothing saying you can't use the same character between multiple games, but it's not like, you use character A in the first game and then you have to use that character in the second game and you keep all your items and stuff from the first game. They're just completely different games. Sometimes the DMs will let you keep items and stuff, especially if there's, all part of the same server or something. But really, each character is for its own game. It's kind of like Monopoly, you pick the hat piece, and that doesn't mean that you always have to pick the hat piece and can only use the hat piece for Monopoly. It just means that for that game, you're using the hat piece. So once you are getting your character, the first step is to fill out a character sheet. This over here is what a paper character sheet looks like. There's a few different styles. You might see them slightly different, but it's the general idea. Um, you'll notice there's lots of blank areas to write stuff down, and you will definitely want to use pencil if you're filling out a paper character sheet, because you'll be erasing stuff and writing in updates and all that stuff constantly. Um, I won't go super into this. If you're filling out a paper character sheet, I recommend doing it with your DM for the game that you're doing it for. They can help you because there's a lot of math and adding stuff up, and you want to make sure you don't actually put a 12 instead of a 10 and mess up all your numbers later. Leveling up is one of the reasons you want to use a pencil for this. You just change all your some of the stuff here will change when you level up. You'll see that there's this little experience points area here. If you're using XP, some games use milestone leveling. And when you level up, you'll take your character sheet and go through it and update it based on what your class says you get when you level up. And then you have to go through and propagate all that and make sure it's all correct. And this is where online versus paper comes in, because I like using D&D Beyond for online stuff, and it does a lot of the math for you, and you just have to choose options and it will do all the propagation for you. So this is a D&D Beyond character sheet. So I'll just go through here and I'll just go through the whole thing. It's much easier to explain this than it is to try to explain a paper sheet. Um, So this here is my first ever D&D character, Crastor the Centaur Ranger. You can see up here he's level 9, and these are all his numbers. So the first numbers to look at are the ability scores. These are kind of the base of the character and determine pretty much all the numbers. So we can see Crastor has 18 strength, 15 dexterity, 12 constitution, 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 8 charisma. He also has a +4 proficiency bonus. And from these numbers, you get everything else on the sheet. Uh, just going through in general, the strength will affect strength stuff here. Like you can see the saving throws, strength gets affected. Um, Dexterity, dex, and so on and so forth. Proficiency will apply to stuff you're proficient in. You can see that the strength and dexterity have these little black dot next to them. That means that Crastor is proficient in those saving throws. Which means that you add both the strength and proficiency bonuses in. When you're adding in the stuff from the ability scores, you use your ability modifiers, which are these numbers up here. The formula for them is pretty simple. It's just your score minus 10 divided by 2, rounded down. So 18 minus 10 is 8, divided by 2 is 4. 15 minus 10 is 5, divided by 2 is 2.5, rounded down is 2. That's just where all these numbers come from. And so to get all of these numbers here and here, you just add up this and this if this applies. So 8 strength save is 4 from strength and 4 from proficiency. 1 con save is 1 from con and 0 from proficiency because he's not proficient. We'll get into all these other numbers here later. First, we're going to look at this stuff here. This D&D Beyond just has all these little tabs that basically show what your character is and what they can do. The first tab is actions. You have all your actions, attacks, normal actions, bonus actions, reactions, other. Um, and
Excuse,
we'll
excuse me. Can you
go
please
ahead.
refresh your page because it's kind of blurry and it looks like Discord doesn't reload it correctly.
Did
I was
that
gonna
help?
say, you might want to change the like your stream quality, like to 30 FPS, and see if it comes over a little clearer
Okay.
in Discord itself.
Yeah. Let me see. I might have to restart the stream then. So I'm just gonna restart it real quick. My resolution, it says it's 1080. Is that any better or?
Try dropping it to 1080 but 30 FPS instead of 60 and see if that helps.
Okay. Oh, I can just
Oh,
go here.
there, that looks much better.
How about
Helped,
now?
whatever you just did. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Hopefully it wasn't too blurry that you couldn't see the stuff I was talking about.
Just the math that you did, like 18 minus 5 or whatever, I didn't understood and I couldn't see it. Just
Okay. Okay, I'll go over that again real quick. So just looking at the math, so we have our ability scores here and the corresponding modifiers up here, and proficiency bonus right here. And all the numbers here, you just get from adding this stuff together. You have the relevant ability score modifier, and then the proficiency bonus if it's applicable. Just looking at this, we can see acrobatics uses dexterity, which is +2, and I'm proficient in it. So +4 equals +6. And you just go through and apply that to all of these numbers. D&D Beyond does all of this stuff automatically, which is why it's really nice. You just need to put your score in and choose what you're proficient in, and it will do all the stuff for you.
Can you clarify one thing?
Mhm.
Back on that screen, the strength and dexterity are now on the top left box are checked, I guess. How do you know? Is that based on class?
You mean the
Yeah.
proficiencies here or the?
Yes.
Yeah, these are based on class.
Thanks.
There's a couple feats you can take that can add proficiencies and the saving throws, but each class starts with 2. Uh, so rangers get strength and dexterity.
This in the player's handbook is where it says saving throw proficiency. Is that what it's?
Yeah, that's what that
Got it.
is.
Thank you.
All right, so here's our basic actions. Generally, if I'm looking at a sheet, I'll just keep the actions on this tab and scroll through. Um, these are the ones you'll be using the most up here. And then we'll look at the spells. So Rangers get some spells. So in this tab, we can see all the spells that Craster has. And D&D Beyond also keeps track of your spell slots. So as a 9th level Ranger, Craster has 1st, 2nd, and 3rd level spells. And he has 4 1st level spell slots, 3 2nd level spell slots, and 2 3rd level spell slots. And you can just cast your spells from here and it will mark off the spell slots. You can see what all the spells do. Just click on the name and it will read all of them. For the spells, if you're playing a class that has spell casting, I would suggest going through and reading and making sure you know exactly what your spells do. Just because no one wants to pause in the middle of the game and read 3 paragraphs and try to figure out exactly what happens. Here we have the inventory. Crafter has some magical items. That's what the colored stuff are. Some normal items, all this stuff. Pretty self-explanatory. Adds up all the stuff you're carrying so you can see if you're carrying too much. And you have your money up here. Features and traits is an interesting tab. It's basically all the things that make your character special. So this will list all the things you get from your class, all the feats you take, all the stuff you get from your race, pretty much everything about your character. You can see there's a lot of stuff. And if you just go through, you'll see it's a fair bit. But this tab has basically the explanation of everything that makes your character special. And as with the spells and stuff, you can click and it will give you a more detailed explanation. Description, notes, and extra are not super useful. They're mostly just fluff stuff. You don't have to use them. So these are the 4 main tabs. There's a couple other things that are unique to D&D Beyond. First is your health and taking damage. Taking damage is pretty simple. You just type in how much damage you took and you hit damage. And if you get healing from a source, you just type in how much healing and you heal. And you see your hit points update. If you ever go to 0 hit points, you'll get this death saving throw thing popping up. And this is a little funky. You have to click on the death saves thing here, and then it will keep track of your failures and successes. We'll go more into death saving throws later, but basically you'll just mark off fails and successes, and 3 failures is dying. And if you get healed while you're unconscious, you can just heal yourself from there. And then we have the rests. There are 2 types of rests in D&D, short rests and long rests. Short rest takes an hour and lets you get back some abilities depending on your class and some hit points based on your hit dice. D&D Beyond just has these couple buttons up here for the rests, and if I want to roll some hit dice to get health back, you just mark off how many hit dice you want, and then you can take your short rest. You'll notice that these are marked off. They don't get reset until you take a long rest, and even on a long rest, you only get half of them back. Long rest here, pretty simple, 8 hours of sleep. You take a long rest and everything gets reset. You can see my hit points went back up to full. If I had cast any spells, they would be completely back. A long rest is basically back to completely healed, except for your hit dice here. You only get half of them back. Any questions on the D&D Beyond character sheet? We'll go over how to apply all these numbers and stuff in an actual game later. All right. Looking at more detail at the ability scores and skills. Like I said, ability scores are the kind of backbone of your character, and pretty much everything else flows from them. They're kind of the base numbers of your character. To generate your ability scores, there's basically 3 different methods. The first is standard array, which is everyone gets an array of 6 different stats, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. And you assign them to whichever stats you want. Craft Store was built using standard array. Then there is point buy, which is you have a pool of 27 points and you start with a baseline of 8 in each score, and you up your scores and you detract points. Just Google point buy. There's these online calculators that you can figure out, or when you're creating a character in D&D Beyond, will do it for you. So this is just kind of standard stuff, and you can increase your points up to a maximum of 15. That's the highest you can increase it to. And you can see I've used 17 out of 27 points for that. So pump some stuff up a bit. And that's how you do a point buy. Those would be your 6 scores. And the final method is rolling. There's many different ways of rolling. The most common is rolling 4d6, drop the lowest for each one. So we'll see what that would look like here. So I rolled 4d6, drop the lowest. So that would be 9 total. And that'd be my score for one of the stats. And you do that 6 different times. So this would be 13, and so on and so forth. Generally, rolling is more swingy than the other two. The other two methods are ensure that all the characters have equal power levels, basically. But if you're rolling for stats, there's a chance someone could have very good scores and someone could have very poor scores. So despite being the most, I don't know if it's the most common anymore, but definitely the historical way of getting stats. I think rolling for stats is kind of falling by the wayside. Any questions about generating the stats? I know it's a lot there, and I was going to go over that stuff near the end when we just create a whole character from scratch. All right. So like I said earlier, from the ability scores, you get the ability score modifiers. And once more, it's your score minus 10 divided by 2 rounded down is how you get all the modifiers. And the modifiers are what you actually apply to all the stuff. You'll pretty much never use your actual score. It'll pretty much always be the modifier. And then let's talk about the actual scores themselves and what they represent. So we have strength, which is just how strong your character is. A lot of attacks with weapons use strength. Strength also affects how much you can carry and how far you can jump. And this is not a comprehensive list. There's other stuff, but these are the main things. Dexterity. Some weapons use dexterity for their attacks. Your armor class includes dexterity. So if we look at Craster's armor class, we can see the dexterity bonus here. And initiative, which is just straight up your dexterity ability modifier. Constitution affects your hit points, how healthy you are. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. They're used for other things, but in combat, most of what they're used for is casting spells. As a ranger, Craster's spellcasting stat is wisdom. And you can see that these modifiers here reflect the wisdom score up here. Look at Cure Wounds. You can see that it restores hit points equal to 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier. So for Craster, it's 1d8 plus 2 because that's his wisdom modifier. And this is the nice thing about D&D Beyond is that it does all the math for you. And if I cast Cure Wounds, it will just tell me how much I heal. If you're doing this in person using pencil and paper, you'll have to remember your modifier and attacks and all that stuff and add them in after each roll. So just to demonstrate, if I cast Cure Wounds here, we can see that I got 7 healing, 5 plus 2. If you were doing it manually, you'd roll a d8 and add 2. So in this case, you'd get 4. All the classes that can cast spells use one of these as their spellcasting modifier. Just depends on the class you choose. So you'll want to pay attention to that when you're assigning your stats. I should mention that each class generally has a primary stat. and you'll want that primary stat to be as high as possible. Generally, it's a stat you use for your attacks. So if you're playing a fighter with a great sword, you want your strength to be as high as possible. It's not like it's against the rules to avoid that or to make a fighter with low strength. It's just not very effective, and the joke gets old pretty quickly. So as a general rule of thumb, your primary stat should be your highest stat. And for any spellcasting class, it will be your spellcasting stat. Just a couple more numbers. Proficiency, like I said, it's this thing here. It's used for stuff you're proficient in. This number is based on your level. So at level 1, it's +2. At level 9, it's +4, etc. It goes from +2 to +6 at level 20. Saving throws, we looked at them a bit earlier. They're just based on your modifiers and your proficiency. And you can see all the numbers here are added together by D&D Beyond. And skills. These are the skills that D&D uses. There's 17 of them, I think. But generally, you'll be proficient in 3 to 8 of them, depending on your class and your feats you take and all that. You can see here, these are the ones Craster is proficient in. And you just get all these numbers from modifier plus proficiency, if proficiency applies. Any questions on all that stuff?
Yes, regarding saving throws,
Mhm.
how it works.
Double check. I think I'll go over that on this page here. Yeah, saving throws and saving throw DCs. So I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
All right. So that's, you've got your character sheet, it's all filled out, you have all these numbers. Now we'll look at like how you use them in combat. There's out of combat uses for a lot of this stuff, but usually the confusing stuff is combat because there's a lot of different rules and a lot of rolling dice and figuring out what exactly happens. So let's look at some combat basics. The first thing to do with combat is know the kind of the baseline. So combat in D&D is separated into rounds and turns. Each creature involved in the combat will go once in each round. And a round will have every creature going once. And each round lasts for 6 seconds in game time. Each creature gets a turn in the round, and on their turn, they can do all their stuff. And the order these turns go in is decided by initiative, which is this thing right here. So what happens when you enter combat is the DM will ask everyone to roll initiative, and everyone will roll initiative. We can see here I rolled and I got a 4.15. That's not great, but all the creatures involved in the combat would roll initiative. And in fact, I'm just gonna do this real quick. Oh. And this is just how it would look in a game on Roll20. We would have this. And then this is how you'd keep track of who goes in what order each turn. On your turn in combat, you have 3 things you can do, and you can do them in any order, and you can even kind of break them up. You have your movement, your actions, and your bonus actions. So if we look over here at Crastor, we can see we have his movement up here. He's got a 40-foot speed. The baseline is 30 feet. Crastor is a little faster because he's a centaur. And in his actions, we can see we have actions right here. The most generic action is just to attack an enemy. And bonus actions are kind of extra stuff you can do. At lower levels, you're not always going to use your bonus action. You just won't have something you can do. And you don't have to use a bonus action if you don't want to. But it's there, and you get 1 per turn. You cannot swap actions and bonus actions. You cannot use a bonus action in place of your action. Despite the names, it's a little confusing. And like I said, you can do these in any order you want. So if I was playing as Crastor, I could move and then attack, or I could attack and then move. And the same with the bonus action, you can put that in anywhere, anytime. The order is completely up to you. There are some things that are non-actions, which are generally triggered when something else happens. The most obvious is a Paladin's Smite. They get that when they hit an attack, and they can just choose to do it. It doesn't cost any actions or bonus actions. If you have something that doesn't take an action, it will say, the triggering thing and what happens. Then we have reactions. Reactions you can take any time, but you still only get 1 per round. So if we look here, we have 3 reactions with Crastor, or 4, I guess. And reactions are always triggered off of something else. You never just choose to take a reaction. There's always something that allows you to take a reaction. So if we look here at this giant killer feat from Crastor, which is part of his ranger, wasn't very helpful. When a larger creature you can see within 5 feet of you hits or misses you with an attack, you can use a reaction to attack that creature. So that's just saying that, if Crastor gets attacked by a large creature, he can just attack back using his reaction. You can take a reaction anytime, but you only get 1 per round, and it resets at the start of your turn. So if Crastor got attacked by a large creature and used his reaction to attack back, he would not be able to use another reaction until the start of his turn again. So those are the basic things your character can do in combat. I wanted to mention at some point here advantage and disadvantage. You might have heard of them, but when you're trying to determine if something happens, rolling a d20, sometimes you'll have advantage or disadvantage, which is kind of D&D's way of saying this task is easier for some reason, or this task is more difficult. Advantage, what happens is you roll 2 d20s, and you choose the highest one. So if I had advantage on this roll, I would choose the 18, and I would use that and just completely disregard the 8. If I had disadvantage, it's the exact opposite. You roll 2 d20s and you choose the lower one. So I rolled these 2, I would choose the 8 and disregard the 18. There are many different ways to get advantage and disadvantage. Generally, your DM will tell you when you roll if it's with advantage or disadvantage. So looking at the basic actions here, we have attack rolls, and this is something that you'll be doing a lot. So if we look at Crastor, we can see these are the attack actions he has. He has a longbow attack, a spear attack, and a couple unarmed attacks. When you attack something, you're comparing your attack roll to the enemy's armor class, which is this number right here, and depends on the enemy. So if I were attacking with Crastor, I would choose a weapon attack, choose an enemy, and then roll the attack. There are 2 ways to roll the attack. Not really 2 ways. I was just going to show you that if you use D&D Beyond and click the button here, you can see the attack gets rolled automatically and it tallies up everything. Or if you were rolling it manually, you would roll a d20 and then add in the modifier, which is +7 for this longbow. So this roll would equal 17. So for the attack rolls, what you're doing is you're rolling a d20 and then you're adding in your modifier. And the modifier here is just the same as all the other things. It's your modifier that's relevant. So you can see the strength, the spear attack has 2 higher than the longbow attack because the longbow uses dexterity and the spear uses strength. And then you add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient with the weapon, which you pretty much always should be. And then these attacks here are a little more because they're magical weapons that add +1 to the attack roll. If I were to attack with a normal spear, you can see it's a +8 instead, and it does slightly less damage. So when you attack, you choose your target, you choose your attack, and you roll the attack. So I'll attack with a spear with Crastor. I have a 19 on my roll. And then we need to find out if that hits. And for that, you compare the roll you just rolled with the armor class of the enemy. So if Crastor here is attacking this veteran, I can look at the veteran stat block and see it has an armor class of 17. So my attack roll of 19 would hit the veteran. And then you roll your damage, which is based on the weapon you're using and your ability score. So if you look at the spear here, the normal spear, it's 1d6 plus 6. So for the damage there, I would roll a d6 and then add 6 to the total. This number gets modified by a couple of different things. The most major is the strength score. Your ability modifier gets applied to that. Not your proficiency bonus, just the modifier. And then Craster also has this fighting style here, which gives them a +2 bonus damage, +2 to damage. So what that looks like is with the spear attack, I would roll the damage, and we can see it does 10 damage. Or if you were rolling it manually, you would roll 1d6 and add 7 to that for 8 damage. You'll probably notice that this has one-handed and two-handed. That's because a spear is a versatile weapon. You can attack with one hand or two hands. The only difference is that a two-handed attack changes the damage die from d6 to d8. And in Craster's case, he doesn't get the bonus +2 if he uses it two-handed. But that's why you have two things showing up here. So if I was attacking two-handed with the spear, I would just roll a d8 and add 7 to that for 10 damage. Any questions on attacking and how that works?
Yes, sorry, I still have some question regarding when you are on roll 20.
Mm-hmm.
How do you? In fact, the first thing that you look at is the chance to strike it, and when you have the chance, when you strike him, you have damage like 10. It was something like this.
Mm-hmm.
How you take it off from veteran guards?
Well, if you're attacking an enemy, which will be controlled by the DM, the DM will just take it off. If you're in person, then they'll write down how much hit points they have. On roll 20 as a DM, I would just do this. And I keep track of the health they have up here.
Oh,
If you
okay.
get,
But in general, it's
yeah, if you get damaged, like say this veteran attacks Crastor and does 11 slashing damage, I would go to my character sheet and type 11 and hit damage. And you can see that your character sheet updates, and this updates over here as well.
And how the DM knows that you are not cheating, you know? But basically, you are using Beyond DnD. So when you click, it's linked directly on roll 20.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how?
I should have explained this a little better with Beyond 20 and how that works. Beyond 20 links the character sheet I have here to the roll 20 tab I have open here. So it allows me to click anything over here and it will automatically get imported over here. And does all the math for you. So
Yeah,
everyone can see this if you're in the campaign. It's a public roll. So if I say I attack, this guy and I roll a 15, I can't tell the DM, oh, I got a 25 because he can see that it's a 15.
yeah, sure, because you are using DnD Beyond, but people from time to time just don't use DnD Beyond and use like a roll D8 and
Yeah.
plus 3 or 4 spear because he says that he got a 4 or 5 spears, but in reality he doesn't have it. or it doesn't have these proficiencies that you had manually
Yeah.
and do the math without no one being able to check what you're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of a constant pain where you have to. The first thing is that as a DM, you kind of have to trust your players. You can't constantly be looking over their shoulders. But you can also apply some gut checks to stuff. Like you can see Craster here has a +9 on his attacks. And a level 1 character will generally not have more than a +5 or maybe a +6. So if you have a level 1 character who's claiming he has a +10 to hit with his attacks, he's probably lying. For the rolling, if you do an online roller, like I am doing with the D&D Beyond, or just typing roll whatever in here, this is all public, and you can't really cheat this. I rolled a 12, and everyone can see that. I can't claim it was something else. If you're doing a game online and people are rolling physical dice and announcing their results, you don't really have a way to monitor that unless you set up a webcam somehow. So I strongly recommend just using an online dice roller. It's just a ton easier, when you don't have to tell everyone exactly what you rolled. You can just say, I attacked the guy in front of me, and click the button, and everyone can see that you got a 19 or a 29, right? So there's a little less communication kerfuffles there and more hype. So for online stuff, I just strongly recommend using an online roller where everyone can see all the rolls. If you're doing it in person, pretty much if you're worried someone is cheating, you could just have them roll out in the middle of the table and everyone can see what they rolled. If they roll a die and pick it up really quickly, then that's, it's not great. But in general, the answer is try to trust people, but there are some signs you can see if you're worried about it.
A general question about, I think it's more Roll20 than D&D
Mhm.
Beyond. In general, players can see other players' hit points, but we can't necessarily see the PCs or monsters' hit points.
The
Is that
way I
correct?
have it set up, a player can only see their own hit points. So if I go and I rejoin as player,
Do you know what I know it probably varies
shoot.
from game to oh.
Oh, I forgot to give my character vision. Whoops.
I know
Anyway,
what you mean though.
yeah, only
But
the DM will be able to see all that stuff.
that the general way that like DMs will set it up so that players cannot view even other players' hit points?
That's just the default way I have it
Okay,
set
alright.
up, and I never tried to change it.
I guess my point is that like we don't know if the monster has 1 hit point left or 200, right?
Right. I mean, you can make a reasonable guess
Sure.
based on the
Sure.
monster, but like you can see with these guys, this guy has 60 hit points and this guy has 11. And there's no super obvious way. A lot of this comes down to your DM, how they
Okay.
describe the enemies you're facing. If I were describing this, I'd say you have a couple of new guards fresh out of training, and one guy who looks like he's been around the block. He's got better armor, got a big sword. Definitely seems like the boss kind of thing. So general idea, probably exact numbers, no. Anything else on that?
That's pretty clear.
All right. Unfortunately, Craster doesn't have any DC spells. So now we'll talk about, first I should mention range and reach. So if we look at these attacks, you can see that a longbow has this range listed here. The first number is the normal range, and the second number is the far range. Anything within normal range, you just attack normally. Anything within the far range, you attack at disadvantage. That's one of the ways disadvantage can come in. For a melee weapon, it will have a reach. So a spear has a reach of 5 feet, so you can attack any enemy within 5 feet of you. So to attack this guy here, Graster would need to be right next to him, 5 feet away. Some melee weapons have 10-foot reach, mostly polearm type things. And spears also have the thrown property. You can throw a spear, and it has a range just like a longbow of 20 feet and a far range of 60 feet. So a normal attack roll if you're throwing it within 20 feet, far attack roll if you're throwing it at 60 feet. Anything beyond 60 feet is just unhittable by throwing a spear. So just a couple of little things to keep in mind about attacking. Now we'll look at saving throws. So we looked at these a bit earlier. These numbers are generated from your ability score and your proficiency bonus. And you use them to resist some sort of effect. For example, if you're fighting a dragon and the dragon breathes fire on you, your DM will probably call for a dexterity saving throw. And you're trying to see if you can avoid the damage or some of the damage when you do that. And these work pretty much the exact same as attack rolls. You just roll a d20 and you add your modifier. So if I was doing a dexterity saving throw, you can see I rolled a 16, add 6 to get 22. Or you can just roll normally. 12 plus 6 is 18. And then for that number, you compare it to the DC of whatever it is you're trying to resist. DC stands for difficulty check. It's pretty much a DM thing, but that number the DM will have, and they will tell you if you passed or if you failed your saving throw. So if I was trying to dodge a dragon's breath and the DC was 20, the 22 would pass and the 18 would fail. And then the DM just tells you what happens after that, depending on if you passed or failed. So maybe I take 40 fire damage, maybe I take 20 fire damage, that sort of thing. Fires can also impose saving throws on enemies. If we look at this spell thing here, you can see this save DC right here. That would be the DC of any spell that Craster used that had a DC, which unfortunately he doesn't have any. I guess he technically does. It's spike growth. So here you can see any creature that can't see the area at the time must make a perception check against your spell save DC to recognize the terrain as hazardous. So in that case, they would have to roll a perception check and try to get above 14. So just for example, if we pretend this is the dragon, say it breathes fire on Crastor, he does a saving throw, and the DM says, okay, 22 is a pass, you take 15 fire damage. Just that sort of thing. Saving throws are kind of opposite attacks, where when you force something to make a saving throw, you're not rolling a die, you're forcing them to roll a die. Sometimes that can be more effective, sometimes that can be less effective. Depends on the enemy. It's just a different way of attacking, basically. Pretty much every way to deal damage, with some exceptions, it will require either an attack roll or have the enemy make a saving throw. Monsters can make saving throws just as characters can. This veteran just got a 17 on their strength saving throw. Any questions about that stuff? Okay. So 0 hit points and death saving throws. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but if you take enough damage that you get knocked down to 0 hit points, or any amount that would put you at negative. So even if I have 4 hit points, if I take 25 damage, it's the same as if I took 4 damage. There is an over damage thing, where if you take your full hit points in negative damage, you instantly die. So if Craster is at 3 hit points, about to die, looking very bad, and he takes 70 damage from a source, he would just die instantly. But once you're at 0, you fall into unconsciousness. You fall down, you can't do anything. And at the start of your turn, you make death saving throws, which are these things here. A death saving throw is just a d20 rolled basically straight up. There's a couple things that can affect them, but they're not super basic. And you just roll a d20. And if it's a 10 or above, it's a pass. If it's a 9 or below, it's a fail. So I got a 10, which is a pass. So I would just mark off a success right here. And then you just keep going until you get 3 failures or 3 successes. If you get 3 failures, you die. If you get 3 successes, you get stabilized, where you no longer have to make death saving throws, but you're still unconscious at 0 hit points. You're stable, you go back into death saving throws. A couple more things about these. If you are unconscious and making saving throws and you take damage, if you take any sorts of damage, you get 1 failure. If you take a critical hit from an attack, you get 2 failures. And finally, if you're rolling these death saves, and if you roll a natural 1, you get 2 failures. And if you roll a natural 20, you automatically regain 1 hit point and leap to your feet. So that's kind of how 0 hit points work. If you're at 0, you're basically out of the fight until you get some hit points back. You can be healed while you're at 0, and if you're healed, it doesn't matter how much, what your saving throws are or whatever. Let's say a cleric heals Craster for 7, and then he gets hit for 7 damage again. It all resets when you go back. So if you get healed, that's the best way to avoid dying. Any questions on dying, avoiding dying?
Oh, basically, if you get healed, you don't need to have 3 success.
Yes. Yeah, basically. If you don't get healed, you need 3 successes. There is one other way. An ally can attempt to stabilize you if you're unconscious, and that is a medicine check with a DC of 10. So we can see here we have medicine. We just roll this. So if Craster is trying to stabilize someone, he would succeed, and they would just go straight to stable and no longer be at risk of dying.
Hey, DBrock.
Mhm.
There's a question in chat that says, can you be hit so hard you instantly die?
You can, yes. That's kind of what I was talking about with the massive damage. So there's 2 things to keep in mind, ways you can insta die. The first is if you take enough damage that your resulting total would be negative your max HP or more. So if Craster had 3 hit points, if he took 70 damage or more from 1 attack, he would just instantly die. This is, if he had 60 hit points, he would need to take 127 damage. So that's pretty rare. It's mostly only concern at low levels if you get hit by an ogre or something with a critical hit. The other way is that some attacks and spells just kill you if they bring you to 0 hit points. A fair few undead, a couple spells like Disintegrate. And for those, the DM will just tell you that, hey, you dropped a 0 and the spell disintegrates you and you turn into ash kind of thing. So it is possible, but most of the time you'll be going into death saving throws.
What do you do if you die?
That is a good question. So there are
Just
options
die?
here.
You're like out of the campaign? Or
Well,
like,
no,
sorry,
so
bye.
so there are options. So first off, there is resurrection magic. Clerics and a couple other classes can cast Revivify as a 3rd level spell. So starting at level 5, they can cast it. It has an expensive material component and can only be cast on someone who's been dead for a minute or less, but it brings you back to life. So that's your easiest option. If you're in a fight that your team wins, but you die and you have a cleric, you can just kind of be brought back right then and there. There's other resurrection spells that your party could go and Either find a person who can cast them or get the materials for that sort of thing. Or if you wish, your character can stay dead. You don't have to be resurrected, and generally then you'll get the opportunity to make a new character and come into the campaign slightly later, but you'll still be playing. I don't know of any DMs who would kick a player out of the campaign completely for dying. Generally, if you die, your character it's gone. It's very sad, but you can make a new character and come in later.
If I understand what you said, that a character can revive you within a minute. That means if you have 4 friends with you, and 5 enemies, that means you have to play really quickly, because if all of them play, that means 1 minute is spent,
Oh,
and you
yes,
can't revive him.
I should have been more clear with the rounds. A round lasts 6 seconds, and every creature in the combat takes their turn within that round. So if Craster attacks a veteran, and then the veteran attacks Craster, that's 1 round, and 6 seconds has passed. And if you add 4 more allies on each side, and they all take their turns, it's still only 6 seconds for 1 round. So 1
I
minute,
thought it, okay, good.
yeah, that's a common thing. 1 minute is always 10 rounds. So usually you'll
I
have enough
thought that it
time.
was every single action. No, 1 action per character. That was 6 seconds.
Yeah, no, one of the hardest things about D&D is visualizing how this works, because it's not that, everyone is standing still while Craster takes his turn, and then Craster stands still while the other guy takes his turn. Everyone is moving at once, and initiative just determines whose things land first. So in this case, because the veteran got a higher initiative than Craster, even if they kind of both attack each other at the same time, the veteran's attack lands first, kind of thing. But it's all happening at the same time. Um, Kind of a little dissonance there when each person only moves 1 at a time, kind of thing. But uh, that's just you got to try to visualize it, I guess. Anything else on that?
There's other spells besides Revivify, aren't there? To
Yeah. There's like 4 or 5 different spells. This is just the first one that you'll get. So this is the spell description for Revivify. You can
okay.
see it's available for these, or clerics, paladins, artificers, life domain clerics, grave domain clerics, circle of wildfire druids, and celestial warlocks. You can see it costs 300 gold worth of diamonds, and you have to be within the last minute. But that's the easiest way to bring a creature back to life. There's others, but that's the easiest.
Okay.
Just wanted to mention some stuff about spell casting. Casting a spell is a little more complicated than launching an attack. You'll see that on a spell like Absorb Elements, it has a bunch of other stuff. So it has a casting time listed. Each spell doesn't necessarily have to be an action, though most of them are. In an Absorb Elements case, it's a reaction, which you take when you take acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. And you can see it has a components here of S. That stands for somatic. There's 3 different types of components. There's verbal, somatic, and material. Verbal component means you have to audibly say something when casting the spell. Somatic component is making a gesture, arcane runes in the air kind of thing. Material component means you need a material to cast the spell. Shoot, that's not the correct one. Like if we look at spike growth, you can see it needs all 3 components, so verbal, somatic, and material. And the material component here is listed as 7 sharp thorns or 7 small twigs, each sharpened to a point. So to cast the spell, you would need to say something, gesture, and have these thorns. For the material component, though, most classes that can cast spells get a focus, an arcane focus, a holy focus, which just can replace almost all material components. Rangers don't, so rangers can use a component pouch, which is basically just a thing that holds all material components. And the general rule with component pouches and foci is that as long as the material for the spell doesn't cost anything and is not consumed when you cast the spell, you can just replace the material with the component pouch or the focus. So for spike growth, you don't actually need to tell your DM, I'm gathering 7 sharp thorns, unless you want to. You can just say, okay, I have my component pouch, and that will have the materials I need for spike growth. If you remember looking at Revivify, that costs 300 gold worth of diamond, which was consumed. So you would not be able to use a component pouch or focus to cast Revivify. You would need the diamond dust. The other thing about spellcasting is concentration. You can see that silence, etc., has this little C next to it. It stands for concentration. What that means is that the spell has an active effect that lasts until your concentration is broken. And for concentration, it can be broken in a couple different ways. The first is if your character is incapacitated, knocked unconscious, that sort of thing. In that case, the concentration ends. The other way is if you take damage, you need to roll a concentration saving throw, which is just a constitution save with a DC of 10. So in this case, Craster would pass the save and would maintain his concentration. For the concentration, if you take damage, technically the formula is half of the damage you take with a minimum of 10. So if you take more than 20 damage, you will need to get a higher save. But that's just something to keep in mind when you cast spells. Like if I wanted to cast Silence with Crastor, I would choose an area to be silenced. And that would remain silenced for 10 minutes unless I fail a concentration saving throw or get incapacitated or some way. Any questions on that?
Yeah, about components.
Mhm.
How would you get those components?
Um, well, most classes will start with a focus or a component pouch if they can cast spells. Just gonna check. A component pouch costs 25 gold. So generally you'll be able to buy it if you don't start with it for whatever reason. Or if you wish, you can actively, describe getting the components. That might be something you do if depending on the campaign. Like for spike growth, I would definitely say it would be pretty easy to find 7 thorns if you're in a forest or something like that. You could just tell your DM you want to gather those, and generally, if it's reasonable, it should be pretty simple to get that. Anything else?
We got a lot of things to understand. I think maybe not tonight, but one day if we can make a game, a little game all together, maybe with you as DM to teach us just one game will be quite efficient, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was going to do a kind of tutorial thing later. I did want to mention some more combat stuff. This is just stuff that is not necessary but might come up in combat, where there's different types of movement. Some enemies will burrow underground or fly. Pretty much all characters will just walk on the ground. There are some senses that let you detect stuff that you can't see. Mostly stuff like tremor sense or blind sight. Generally, that's stuff that monsters will have, and characters won't get until later. The big thing here is conditions, where I mentioned incapacitated earlier, and we'll go and take a look. These are all the conditions your character can have in D&D. They all do different things. There is a page that I find very helpful here. And this just lists all the effects of all the conditions. And note that some of them link back to each other. Like a paralyzed creature is also incapacitated. And this just lists all the conditions and what they do. And it's kind of handy to have this available. I'm just going to link it in the chat. So you don't have to memorize all these conditions, but if the DM tells you, okay, you are now restrained, you can just go to the sheet and see, okay, your speed becomes 0, attack rolls against you have advantage, and your attack rolls have disadvantage, and you have disadvantage on dex saving throws. So these are all the conditions. You can toggle them on or off. But there's something that can come up pretty frequently. And like I mentioned, unconscious is what happens when you go to 0 hit points. Vulnerabilities, resistances, and immunities. When you take damage, you might not take that number. You can have resistance or vulnerability to that damage. So for example, if you take poison damage and you're a dwarf, you are resistant to poison, and you only take half the damage. Vulnerability is the opposite. You take double damage. Fortunately, that's pretty rare. And immunity is also pretty rare, and you just take no damage. But these are things to keep in mind because some monsters might have resistances or immunities, so keep that in mind. There are a bunch of actions that aren't just attacking or casting a spell. This is kind of a list of all of them. Generally, you don't really need them. The big ones to know are dash and disengage. Where dashing, you use your action to move your movement speed again. So if Craster dashed, he could move 80 feet. And disengage lets you move without taking any opportunity attacks, which I really should mention at some point. You may have noticed that under the reactions, opportunity attack is listed somewhere. And basically, when a creature moves out of your attack range, you can attack them using your reaction. So if we go to this example here, if Craster is fighting as a veteran and decided that he didn't want to keep fighting, he could choose to move away. But if he moved away out of the veteran's reach, so out of any of these squares here, the veteran would be able to get an attack of opportunity against him. And that just means that the veteran uses his reaction and makes an attack roll against Craster. The disengage action prevents creatures from taking that attack of opportunity against you. So if Craster wanted to get away from the veteran without getting attacked, he would have to disengage first and then move away, giving up his action to do anything else on that turn in the process. Then there's readying an action. I see people get confused about this a fair bit. Readying an action is basically saying, I want to do this as my action, but not now, later, kind of thing. Kind of timing something. If you know your ally is going to cast a spell that will make the enemy easier to hit, you could hold your action until that spell has landed and make your attack easier. Readying an action, the big thing to remember is that it's for in combat use only. It's not something you do out of combat. I see lots of people say something like, I'm going to kick down the door and I'm going to ready my action. As soon as this guy kicks the door and we see the enemies, I'm going to shoot them with my bow. And that sounds super reasonable, but because you're not in combat before you kick down the door, you can't really do that. And instead, what you would get is the surprised condition on the enemies, which is not listed here. Surprise is basically just you can't do anything for the first turn because you are surprised. Stealth is another one that's kind of hard to get your mind around. And it's a little more complicated than I kind of want to go into right now. But just keep in mind that with stealth, you need to be able to hide from a creature. It can't just directly see you. And you need to take your action to use the hide action. And if you do that, then the creature will lose track of you and you will be hidden. Controlled creatures, some spells or classes have creatures that are not your character that you kind of control, either telepathically or verbally. For those, kind of depends on your DM on how they want to do it. Either they'll ask what you want the creatures to do and move them for you, or they'll just give you direct control and you move the creatures yourself. Sometimes there'll be traps and triggered effects that happen outside of initiative order. When that happens, it's basically just up to your DM to decide who it affects and what exactly happens. And finally, kind of an honorable mention, we have rare and legendary actions, which are kind of a higher level thing, but they are part of the official rules, and they also take place outside of the initiative order. So if your DM is moving a creature around or doing stuff when it's not their turn, it's not that they're cheating, they're probably just using rare or legendary actions. Any questions on the advanced stuff? I kind of went through it pretty quickly because this is taking a bit longer than I thought. And then if people are interested, I would just do a quick combat round here between Crashster and his veteran, just to show you guys what it looks like and what all the dice rolls would be. Any questions on that stuff?
Oh, no, thanks.
All right, so just a quick demonstration of what exactly combat would look like in an actual combat scenario, where Craftstor is sparring against this veteran here. So as a DM, first thing I do is say, okay, Craftstor and the veteran, you guys are sparring, go ahead and roll initiative. So I would go to Craftstor, roll my initiative, get an initiative of 6. And the veteran would also roll his initiative, get an initiative of 4. So, okay, you guys roll initiative. Craftstor, you go first. I'd say, okay, I have my movement, my action, my bonus action. For my bonus action, I'm going to cast a spell. Hunter's Mark is a bonus action casting time. You choose a creature you see within range and mark it. Until a spell ends, you deal an extra 1d6 damage whenever you hit with a weapon attack. So I would cast the spell, and this just takes effect. And you can see that it marked off the first level spell slot, and it will show up in the tab here that I cast it. And then I will take my movement, move next to this guy, and pull out my spear and attack him. And one thing, because Craster is level 9, Craster has extra attack, which means he attacks twice instead of once with the attack action. So he would just attack twice. And okay, we have a 29, which you can see is a critical hit. He rolled a natural 20 and a 19. The DM will look at the armor class of the veteran and say, okay, both of those attacks hit. Go ahead and roll your damage. One thing you can do with DnD Beyond 20 is if you click this little pink thing, it will roll the damage automatically. Or you can go back here and draw it from here. With a critical hit, you do extra damage. You do 1 extra damage die. So if you look here, you can see you have 1d6 plus 7 and plus another 1d6. So the total is 2d6 plus 7 for the critical hit. So that did 10 damage. And then the second attack also hit and also did 10 damage. So Craster just did 20 damage, but he also cast Hunter's Mark earlier, which means whenever he hits, he deals an extra 1d6 damage with the attack. So each of these attacks does an extra 1d6, plus the critical hit will double that 1d6 as well. So that's an extra 2d6 and 1d6. So another 11 damage from Hunter's Mark. And then that would be the end of Craster's turn. He'd say, okay, end my turn. And the veteran gets to attack. And the veteran, you can see on its stat block, has multi-attack as well, which is slightly different, but basically the same thing. And it will attack with its longsword twice, and its short sword once. And here we can see the veteran's attacks. So the veteran rolled a 9, a 21, and a 25. And if we look at Craster, we have an armor class of 18. So the 9 attack will miss, but the 21 and the 25 will both hit. So that is 10 slashing damage and 12 piercing damage from the short sword. And because Craster got hit twice and he is concentrating on Hunter's Mark, it is concentration. He needs to roll 2 saving throws. And it looks like he succeeded on the first one, but failed on the second one. So he's no longer has Hunter's Mark up and is no longer concentrating on it. And then we'd go back around and go through the round again and keep doing that until the combat ends. Either one side's defeated, gives up, or flees, or whatever happens. Any questions about that?
How did you get the veteran pages, Monster?
This is a D&D Beyond page that lists pretty much all the monsters. The caveat here is that you need to own the source books that has the monster in order to see it, or be part of a campaign of someone who does. This is kind of the bad side of D&D Beyond, where a lot of it is monetized. They need an income source, and so to access information, you need to buy the book on the D&D Beyond marketplace. Some stuff is free, but pretty much everything is not. Anything that is in the basic rules is free, and everyone will be able to access. But I just went to this page, searched for veteran, and clicked on this. And as the DM, I'm using Beyond 20 to connect this page to the Roll20. But if I wasn't, I would have to be rolling all this stuff manually. So I'd be rolling that to see if the attack hit, kind of thing.
Oh, DM has to buy the subscription in order to have all the monsters.
Yeah, there's it's one of those things where you don't need to buy a subscription, but there's lots of books and they're constantly coming out with new monsters, and these monsters are locked behind the books. The good news is that not everyone needs to buy the books, which is probably a great thing. So we can see that these monsters are from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which I don't own, but I am in a campaign of someone who does, so I can still see and use the stat block. But yes, that is the downside of D&D Beyond, is that to access a lot of the stuff, you need to buy the digital version of the book. And the DM can share that with players in the campaign, but someone still needs to buy it. So that is the downside of D&D Beyond. Any other questions about that? Or combat in general? I know I glossed over a lot of the slightly more advanced stuff. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. Right. Sounds like people don't have questions. So I was going to go through and make a character in D&D Beyond real quick. Just showing you how you do it and how you would make a character from scratch. So go to D&D Beyond. My characters, I have a few different characters. I'm not sure where the create character button is. Oh. So here we go. Here's the start. Pretty much always you'll want to use standard. That just like takes you through piece by piece. And then you'll start making your character. And you can see at the top here, these are the things you need to do. So this is the basic settings thing. You have your name, you have your sources. Generally the stuff you won't really want to touch. The big thing you might want to change is advancement type. Depending on your campaign, you might be using XP or you might be using milestone. And your hit point type. When you level up, you gain hit points, and that depends on your hit dice from your class. When you use a fixed hit point level up, you just get the average roll of the die. If you do it manual, you have to roll the die and get some more randomness in how much hit points you have. Then there are these two things here. Basically, you'll just want to do whatever your DM tells you for this stuff. And then we go on. Next, you choose your race. I have a lot of options because I have quite a few books. But if you don't have any books, you'll have only a couple options here. There's a lot of stuff, and you can look through and see exactly what the race does. Take your time with this and figure out what you want to play. I'm just going to choose something. Look at this Kalash Tar. They've got some interesting traits. You get your ability score increase. So your wisdom and charisma will increase. A couple extra things. This looks fine. I'll choose Kalash Tar. This will just show you everything you get from your race, and you get to choose one extra language. D&D Beyond is really nice, where if you need to choose a choice, it'll have this little exclamation mark. And all these things are just things that you get. You don't need to choose, but it will describe what they do. So I will choose Infernal for my race or my language and move on. And then you need to choose a class. These are all the classes. Hopefully you have a class in mind when you're making your character. I'm gonna just make a fighter, and it will tell you what you get for your class. Now we have our level 1 fighter here, and we get to choose 2 proficiencies. I'll do athletics and perception. And if I want to make this character, but say I want to make it at level 3, you can just go here and change the level, and it will give you more stuff. So for my fighting style, I will choose dueling. This is the same thing that Craster had. And for the martial archetype, this is a subclass. So when you're making a character, you'll want to look at the class and all these subclasses that come with it. So this is the fighter page on D&D Beyond, and you can just go through and see that these are all the subclasses available for the fighter, and it tells you everything you get. Generally, when you're starting to make a character, before you actually go into D&D Beyond, I would look through the page like this for the class you're interested in, and make sure that you understand what you're getting, and probably choose a subclass at the same time. You can see that there's a bunch of options here, but again, a bunch of these are locked behind digital books in D&D Beyond. So you won't have all these options, so you don't have a bunch of the books. For my character here, I'm going to choose a Rune Knight Fighter. And choosing that will pop up more stuff. You can see we got some proficiencies, this Giant's Might ability, and 2 of these runes. I've already looked through, I know what these do, but when you're making your character, you'll want to look through and choose the correct option. It's worth spending some time doing this and not just trying to rush through it, especially if you choose a more complicated class like Runesmith Fighter. And then we get to the ability scores here. First, you choose your generation method. These are the 3 that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to choose point buy so we can see what this looks like. And then I'm just going to put a bunch of points into stuff. All right, so these are the points I put in from point buy, and these are the totals, including the racial bonuses I get from being Kalashtar. So wisdom increases by 2 and charisma by 1. So putting wisdom at 16 and charisma at 11. Some of you will notice that I told you to make your primary stat your highest, and for a fighter, that's usually strength. In this case, it's a little special because I can't increase the strength higher than 15, which is the same bonus as 14. And wisdom is only higher because I get the wisdom's increase from being Kalashtar. But this is planned, and in general, you'll want to make your primary stat the highest. And then you can see here, this is just where the calculations come from.
And just one question: why didn't put you 15? Because total will be 40, right? On
Yeah.
strength. But if you level up after, you will be in. You will get 1 point in strength, and you will have another.
Yeah, so I could do that. The difference with this is that when you have a 15 ability score, your modifier, which is what you use for most of the stuff, is still +2, which is the same as 14. By putting 1 less point into strength and 1 more into wisdom, I put wisdom up to 16, which makes the modifier +3. It's kind of a min-maxy thing, which you don't need to worry about, but it would probably actually be more reasonable to do this. Get your strength as high as possible. And then we get to the description. Just have a name. For here, you can put in a picture. You don't need to find stuff. They have some stuff here for free, or you can just look on the web for an image, find something, download it, put it up here. Pretty simple. Backgrounds. Backgrounds are kind of interesting because they give you some minor benefits. But in general, they're mostly flavor. And as you can see, a lot of this stuff is kind of weird, and from a source book that you probably don't have. But for example, if you choose the Sage background, you get more languages, you have suggested characteristics. If you choose Noble, you get a gaming set and a language kind of thing, just some minor stuff, but it can help you flesh out your character. You choose Soldier, get a couple skills and a tool. And then we have equipment. For this page, I suggest almost always choosing equipment here, because it will give you options to choose from. Whereas with gold, you have to work with your DM and figure out what you can buy and stuff. So just choose equipment, and it will show you the equipment you get. Chainmail or leather armor. Choose chainmail. You just go through and pick whatever you want. I'll just choose the first option. This is pretty much just flavor. Just choose a couple of things. Common clothes, pouch, and click add starting equipment. It will add all this stuff to your character. And that's it. We go to the character sheet. We take a look at our character, and this is what we have. We have here in a level 3 Kalashtar fighter. For the inventory, I'm going to choose my martial weapon, which is going to be a warhammer. And just going to equip all this stuff. And we can see that now we have our stuff ready to go. So we have an armor class of 18 from our chainmail plus our shield. We have our attacks, our crossbow, which we have a +2 because we're proficient, and our warhammer, which is +4 because we are proficient and we get our strength bonus. Deals 1d8 plus 4 damage, etc., etc. 28 hit points, strength and constitution saving throws. Here's our skill proficiencies. You'll notice that we have little A's and D's next to these. These are advantage and disadvantage on all of the rolls. The stealth comes from the chainmail. This gives disadvantage on stealth rolls if you're wearing it. And the advantage comes from the rune carver from the runesmith subclass. Yeah, that was just really quick going through, made a character level 3, ready to go. I don't need anything else. Any questions on that, or that's pretty much all I was planning on going through. If you guys want to try making characters, if you haven't already, or modifying them, I can help guide you through it. Or if you want, I can bring you into this campaign and we can practice some combat stuff. Or you can just leave. But that's everything I had planned.
I got a question regarding books.
Mhm.
It's quite confusing. For example, I bought physically the handbook players, if I remember the name, and what I can do with this. I just there is no campaign in it. It's just to learn how it works, right?
Yeah, so the thing with D&D Beyond is it's kind of a separate thing from Wizards of the Coast, where they outsource the online thing. If you look around, you can see some discussion on it. But unfortunately, having the physical book doesn't give you anything on D&D Beyond. So if you wanted to use the character maker in D&D Beyond and use that book, you'd either need to buy the book on D&D Beyond or join a campaign of someone who has bought it. Yeah, like I said, it's the frustrating thing, especially for people who have the physical books and find it pretty ridiculous that they have to rebuy the books if they want to use what they bought on D&D Beyond.
That player handbook just lets you create your characters, right?
So the basic rules are free for everyone on
Yep.
D&D Beyond, and they will let you do very basic stuff. Make a character, but you only get like a couple of race options and one subclass option kind of thing. It's rather limited. But this is the basic rules that goes through what you need, the bare bones of what you need to play the game. The player's handbook has the more stuff, more spells, more character stuff, starting equipment, races, etc. So you don't need the player's handbook to make a character, but it will give you a lot more options, and the basic rules is pretty bare bones.
Can you clarify back on Roll20?
Mhm.
Say you were at level 3 and you leveled up to level 4 through experience or
Mhm.
event. Are you just literally changing it from 3 to 4 and it's doing the math to level you up? Or are you putting in the new ASI increases and the point
Um,
increases?
let's go ahead and level up Crafter real quick. That's not what I wanted. So if we go to manage character and levels here, he's level 9 right now. If I put this up to level 10, we'll see that you get your options.
It'll prompt
Here.
you for whatever comes
Yeah,
on
yeah,
board.
it'll prompt you for the
Cool.
options. So he gets
Okay.
an extra thing, and if we go back to the sheet, we'll see that his hit points increased, and he has another natural explorer. But
And,
level
so-
10 for Ranger isn't super exciting.
and if you're doing the fixed hit points where it does the average of the roll, it also include any proficiency bonus you might have? Assuming
Yeah.
it includes that. Okay. Yeah.
No, the dice roll doesn't include the hit dice does not include proficiency bonus. It's
You'd have to
just
overwrite that.
no, it will automatically do it. But when you roll it, the total is whatever you roll on the die plus your Constitution modifier.
Roll 20 adds that Constitution modifier for you.
Roll 20 does.
Okay. That's what I was asking. Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't use the roll 20 sheets. I use the D&D Beyond sheets. But yes, the D&D Beyond will add the Constitution modifier for you.
That's what I meant. Sorry, I meant
Yeah.
D&D Beyond. Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. It's all automatic. So yeah, I leveled up to level 13.
Gotcha. Thanks again. Thanks
And
for doing this. This is very helpful.
sure. Yeah, you can see hit points went up, proficiency bonus went up. It's all automatic.
Did you mention multi-classing at all?
I did not. That's kind of a little more advanced, but
Okay.
it is a thing you can do usually. Did you want to go into multi-classing or?
I think it could be useful.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about it. So multi-classing, the first thing is technically it is an optional rule. If your DM doesn't want you multi-classing, then no multi-classing, sorry. But it's a very popular thing. So when you multi-class, there's a couple prerequisites. The first is that your ability scores need to be good enough, which means you need at least a 13 in the relevant ability scores. If I go to here and I try to add another class, not really sure. Here we go. You can see that some of them have the prerequisites not met. So because his int is lower than 13, he can't multi-class into an artificer. But you can multi-class into all of these because he's got good strength and wisdom. And dexterity is okay. So say multi-classes into a cleric, it's pretty much the same thing as normal leveling up. You'll have your level in your first class, your level in your second class. And it will give you some stuff. So if we go to spells as a level 1 cleric, you'll have your cleric spells here, which you need to select from the list. D&D Beyond is pretty good about doing stuff automatically. But there's a whole page about multi-classing and what happens with it. In general, you'll get some proficiencies, but not others. Like as a fighter, you get heavy armor proficiency. And if you multi-class into a fighter, then you'd get that heavy armor proficiency. But a fighter also gets Constitution saving throw proficiency, and multi-classing into a fighter would not give Craster a Constitution saving throw proficiency. There's just a whole page of what you get, and it depends on the class sometimes as well. And if you're multi-classing, I'd suggest reading through that page and figuring out what exactly you get, or just go and make it on D&D Beyond, and it should automatically update all your stuff, and you can see if you like what you get. There are some multi-classes that are better than others, and really I would suggest talking to your DM before multi-classing and making sure that what you're planning is okay. Um, if you're doing something like a multi-class of monk and wizard, um, that might not be super great because those two classes do very different things. Um, and on the contrary, if you're doing something that could be too strong, there are some combos out there that are kind of ridiculous. Your DM might not want you to do that. So really, before multi-classing, I'd suggest talking to your DM and making sure that they allow multi-classing and your multi-class sounds good and reasonable, and make sure you understand exactly what you get. Especially if you're doing in-person pencil and paper stuff, you need to be very careful about what exactly you get from your multi-class.